Hey everyone, this is Cindy Lou with CHRO Partners, and I'm joined today with Federico Demarin. And Federico's down here in Miami. He's safe, no hurricanes yet in the Miami area. But we're going to talk today about the 70/30 blueprint, how to lead as a strategic CHRO without drowning in the work. And it's kind of funny, drowning. So um, let's let's talk a little bit about your background first, though, Federico, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to go into some details around kind of how you discovered this and what are your techniques for not drowning in the technical work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Cindy, for the introduction. As you can see, the sun is in my face, so this is actually Florida. We have a hurricane alert, but the sun is coming through my window. Um, so my journey, I started in HR by chance, like I've heard many colleagues have done. At least back in my time, it wasn't clear what human resources was responsible for. So um, I started by chance, but over 25 plus years, I've led people functions at companies like Group M, which is media advertising, 360 Duty Free, which is duty free retail. Swarovski is the jewelry business with different business units. Thomson Reuters, which is a bit of a, it was actually a bit of an agency, financial market data, SaaS, etc. I worked across local, regional, and global roles in different parts of the world, leading teams through many different challenges, which is what makes it exciting. Things like mergers, acquisitions, right sizing, which is not a pleasant one, cultural shifts. Always in companies that are either private or public, family owned or startups. Um, I always wanted to work with strategy, although always with the hand in operation, the famous or infamous hands-on
Mm-hmm.
um, HR leader, because I like it. I like to be close to my people. I never like to be hovering only at strategic level and let things go. Um, Lately, the latest thing I've worked as one of the interesting things that everybody is trying to get their hands on is AI.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked in my last job project related to AI and managed to get inside the technology and its possibilities. Mostly its future. Of course, today it has applications, but still, I think it's just a tiny little piece of what that technology can do for us. Um, and the topic of the conversation, the balance between strategy and execution. I think this is something I've always had in one hand and the other.
Yeah, so we're going to go deeper dive into like defining strategy versus operations, operational work, self-awareness, seeking guidance, change, building your A team and how to coach and develop them, leading without dissonance, and your famous 30/70 rule. Before we jump into that, Federico, how does a CHRO feel when they're not doing these things, right? When they're not balancing it, what does it feel like?
Well, obviously, you're never sure what your priorities are. You're always multitasking, which at one point in time it was seen as, oh, you're multitasking, you're great. Actually, it's not a good thing if you really want to focus on the things first of all, that create value for the company you work for, but also value for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The operation never stops, so it's always going to take time in your agenda. So when you don't have a clear prioritization between strategy and operations always takes over because it's volume. It's more black and white. It's easier to solve. Complexity is usually closer to strategy. It's also mid to long term. It's not immediate. So the temptation and the pressure to balance towards operation is huge. So it feels like you're trying to catch up on the nice things, the smart things, the value added things that your executives want you to focus on, but the day goes by and you said, what did I do? And I couldn't. I didn't have the time. I never had the time. That's how it feels.
Right, right. And then once you have made these shifts or these switches, what does it feel like when you're doing it right and you can have that balance?
Well, at the beginning is a strange feeling because suddenly your agenda has holes and you said, "Oh, I have time. So what do I do with this?" Right? So you go back to your priorities and say, "Oh, these are the things that I'm supposed to progress on." But it's, as I said, it doesn't have a very 1 2 3 clear agenda. You have to build it. You have to understand, how do you plan ahead, how do you start booking time to develop those strategic priorities that you're defining on, how do you turn them into actionable plans, so eventually
Hmm.
everything becomes operation, right? Every strategic plan hopefully should become something in your operation. So it's you start switching your mind in terms of firefighting. Is okay, let me think ahead of time. If this is a 5 year plan, what should I do, what are the milestones that I need to achieve? So you start forward and then you go back and said, okay, what should I be doing now, short term, my objectives, my goals. So at the beginning it feels a bit like you're in shaky ground, but once you understand how to work strategically and start planning, it feels comfortable because you're doing the things you like,
Yeah.
especially when you reach this point in your career.
Right. I think that sometimes the things that got you, to this point are not the same kind of behaviors that help you be a strategic leader. And it's sometimes hard to get rid of those habits, right? And you feel more comfortable. And sometimes we keep ourselves safe, right? By going back to the things that we know how to do. And so I know sometimes, like if I'm stressed out, I go back to activity, 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 because then I feel like I'm doing something, right? Versus pulling back and saying, look, I need to take the time to slow down to speed up.
Of course, and of course, I remember, when you start going through this path at the beginning, and you also feel like I was feeling like I was being less productive,
Hmm.
right? Because the immediate, you love to be the guy that has all the answers. People come to you and then you give answers to everybody's happy because you're giving fast answers to questions. So when you get rid of that, the results are ambiguous. They take time. It's not immediate that you feel, oh, I'm being result oriented, I am productive, I'm getting the things that I'm working for. So it's interesting how do you go through that shift, that
Yeah,
it's time bound, right? So short term versus mid to long term.
right, right. No, that's a great call out to recognize that kind of emotion that you might go through as you're making these shifts. I'm curious, what's been some of your like? Of course, everybody's like, I want to be incentive, but or strategic, but sometimes it's harder to do than saying you have to have some kind of goal in mind, right? We were talking about vacation earlier. What's been some of your like incentive to get to this strategic level?
I think, every time I go, I went into a job, and especially lately that you get more wisdom out of all your mistakes, you try to figure out what is your purpose. So what is it that you're trying to achieve other than a pay, a job that you more or less like? So what are you trying to achieve? What is your purpose? What makes you tick? What makes you wake up every morning? So when you can answer that, it's much easier to understand how to divide your time.
Yeah.
So, we were discussing earlier that, research shows that CHROs should be 50% strategic, 50% operational, which is, of course, it's a rule of thumb, depends on many, many variables, including the size of the company.
Hmm.
But in my case, I always wanted to, balance is a huge thing in my life. It has always been since I'm a kid. I wanted to travel. I wanted to, spend time with my friends, with my family. So to me, it was always looking for opportunities to work in companies that would allow you to work with people from different countries, that would allow you to travel, that you will be able to enjoy your time off. Uh, and with that in mind, you start prioritizing. As the earlier you can figure that out, and it doesn't have to be what I just said. Of course, it can be completely different. It will help you understand when priorities are unbalanced, when they're going in a different direction compared to where they should go if you follow your purpose.
Yeah.
um, and it's a tough exercise. I've been coaching some people lately, and middle managers and senior managers. who have gone through 15, 20 years of career, they don't really know why. What is it that they're chasing, right? Once you had enough of pay increases, enough of titles, so why am I doing this for other than a paycheck, right? So discovering yourself again, finding your own purpose is super important. And that's the way you kind of start having this north that will help you prioritize.
Yeah, anchoring to that thing that drives you. So I think that makes sense. Back to the 50% that you mentioned, I think that was something in Deloitte that they published. And
Correct.
actually, last month at our big HR event in Dallas, one of our panelists, Elizabeth Galloway, actually talked about how she works 90% in the business versus in HR, right? So they're a giant global organization. And I'm like, that's amazing. I think everybody was like, oh, that, sounds amazing. But it's also hard because then you're just completely reinventing yourself, right? When you're in HR, you're like spending most of your time in HR and suddenly you're flipping the switch and your energy and your time, something you're not as comfortable with, right? You're having to spend more of your time there. So
Yeah, of course.
I'm curious from the audience if you guys would like to say hello, first of all, let me know that you're in the audience. Also, if you're willing to share, like what percentage of your time you spend on strategic work versus the operational work, feel free to drop that in the chat and say hello to Federico. Okay.
Sure.
So
And
go ahead.
sorry, Cindy, one clarification important when you think about that.
Uh-huh.
So there are some things that may seem operational, but they're actually quite strategic, and the other
Okay.
way around. So you need to understand what is the criteria
Mm-hmm.
of your company and for
Yeah.
yourself that defines what is strategic versus operational, because especially the smaller the company, the easier it is to mix it
Sure.
up.
So how would you define that? How do you distinguish?
I think strategic has to come from the business. So when you listen to your executives, to your CEO,
Uh-huh.
what are the key priorities for the company? You can always start with the mission, the vision, and the values. But if
Mm-hmm.
they have the OKRs, what matter the most, whatever your company calls it,
Mm-hmm.
those are the strategic priorities. And you always have to go beyond 1 year. It doesn't mean that they're not urgent things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every strategic priority may have urgent things, um, but it's important to understand the difference, because sometimes you may get say that, oh, I don't like this. This is not strategic. No, it actually is strategic. You just don't like it. It's not the same thing,
Right. Right.
and it has happened to me, of course.
Yeah. Awesome. The second shift you talk about is talk about like our operations holding you hostage. Do you feel like it's self-kidnapping? I think is what you told me. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I remember, it's a comfort zone. Comfort zone is always trying to hold you back, right? It feels great, especially in my case, where my purpose was to always help people shine, right? So it's a comfort zone when people in your team come asking for advice, asking for guidance, and then you provide it. You give answers, but eventually your day goes by and you haven't achieved anything in those mid to long term strategic goals. So it's you can easily say, oh, I'm busy, too busy with the operation doesn't let me go, but it's actually you that doesn't want to let go. You mentioned that, right? We love what you do. When you love what you do, it's hard to let go. 90% of the time strategic, if you really love it, you're more like an advisor, you're hovering over the organization, and then you have people that can manage the entire operation. That is fine, as long as that's what you want.
yeah.
you know at the beginning, what I said is I like to be hands-on, which doesn't mean I'm in the operation, but I like to have a pulse. I like to be there to understand what's going on, to see what my people are working on. It's not like I don't think I'll be 100% comfortable as a CHRO, not as an advisor, but as a CHRO, having only one finger in the operation, right? Because I feel I'm disconnected, more like a consultant, which is great if you are a consultant, not necessarily as the CHRO of the company.
Right. That makes sense. Want to just say hello to some folks. Hey, Eric, thanks for joining. Lisa, Armando, good to see you. It's been a while. Janelle, some LinkedIn user, no name. Terry Cooley, good to see you. Amanda, so good to see you. And thanks, Jamie, Amanda, you guys for putting your comments in there. It's a challenge, I think, especially when you're first standing up a HR function, right? There's so many really sizable organizations that they don't have an HRIS system yet, right? Or There's not one system of record to even know how many employees you have. It sounds so elementary, but there are just many, many large organizations that lack some of those foundational things. And so I think thinking about how to carve out that time is really important for the long term, right? Because if you don't set that vision early on, I think many of the senior leaders will just view you as tactical.
Yeah, and I can give you an example. I remember, and I'm going to say the name of the stage, but basically, one of the things I was developing was a very data driven scorecard for
Mhm.
everything HR was doing. So all the KPIs, no system, no HRIS, and I was bringing in data like revenue per head count, things that would connect with the financials of the company,
Mhm.
employee turnover, all the exit interviews. It was beautiful, but honestly, the other executives, they just didn't care. So is that strategic or is that operational? So I asked myself this question when I could see that people were not looking at it. So maybe the strategic task is to show the value, is to understand why that is important. That's what I should be doing. I shouldn't be doing the scorecard because that is the transactional side. And I cannot do that until I've done my work, which is it's going to take time to convince executives, oh, this is why we need to look into this data and not just the P&L. So that was a good example of how I realized I'm dedicating my time in building all this PowerPoint, Excel, Power BI, and no, it was not creating value for the executives and the company. The other side, because I believed in the importance of that, was okay, I need to sell this first. I need to convince them.
Mhm.
And that was my task versus the task I could delegate to people in my team.
How did you go about doing that? I think that's a big topic for a lot of HR leaders, right? Be
Yeah,
able to
of
speak
course.
the language of the business and convince them.
Yeah, I think it's important to start with the KPIs they value over anything else, and that changes company to company. I mean, obviously, a P&L, revenue, profit, but sometimes in some companies, it's actually not that. It might be compliance, it might be client retention. So there's the companies and their cultures have their own key KPIs that are not necessarily the ones that you see published, but the ones everyone speaks of and worries about. So you start with those KPIs and say, okay, how do my KPIs connect with
Mhm.
this ones? Where is the direct impact, the second degree impact, so you can understand how can you present that to show, okay, this is how I can bring value, how what we are doing, our famous employee life cycle, and all their KPIs, how they impact this KPI that is crucial for you.
Right.
But on the other side, you need to teach that to your team,
Yeah.
because I remember people, scratching their heads like, what am I investing all this time into this KPI? Who cares about this? They don't understand it because they don't see that connection either.
Yeah. So it's your job as the
Yeah,
sales leader almost of, for HR to make that connection for them. Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
got to give them what they want first before you can give them what they need.
Exactly. Exactly. You need to prove that you can add value. You know the business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. They don't always see that connection directly. And we sometimes will talk talent too quick and then we just lose them. So totally, totally mistake I've made as well. You talked about your teams a lot, and your third shift was to build an A team, and now you're talking my love language, building a great team. And I'll tell you that early in my career, I stumbled through leadership. But what got me through and why I always made my numbers is because I knew how to hire an A team because I came out of executive search. So what I knew nothing about leadership or growing, general management, I knew how to hire amazing, amazing people, and so that got me through. Tell me a little bit about your point of view on building an A team.
Sure. And I've always been lucky to go into companies with teams I can work with. So to me, that is very important. First of all, understand if you're joining a company, um, who's there, and don't just judge based on gossip or comments. really understand what they do, their frustrations, their success. And always been lucky to say, okay, maybe this person. And I remember cases where said on the first day, okay, first day you need to fire this one in the team, and I said, okay, let me go through this, and it wasn't the case at all. It's just it was lack of structure, lack of leadership, lack of processes that would make this person fail, but the person was excellent. So building an A team starts by knowing, really knowing who's there. It's not about reading a resume. It's not about listening just to the opinions. You really need to do a 360, understand, discuss with these people, have your own gut feeling at the end once you have all the facts, and then see, okay, who do I need in this company based on this balance between strategy and execution, how it is today and how I wanted it to be? Who do I need in my team? Do I need someone that is really good at learning and development, because there's a lot of transactional work coming out of that, and I don't want to be drawn into it? I can go into performance management if it's easy, simple, and a transactional task if I don't have the team for it. If I have the team, I just need to make sure these are people I can delegate. So they're result oriented, they're task driven. I don't have to be breathing behind their neck like, did you do this? Did you do this? You know, habits of effective and efficiency, like how do you answer emails, how do you plan your week on your calendars. Those things will help you assess the kind of people that you have that would allow you to delegate. I've always used the situational leadership model to understand the people in my team and said, okay, who should I go hand to hand for a little while, prove case of what I'm doing, just give them support or just let them fly because they're fantastic.
Right. First of all, I love that leadership style of coming in and saying, let me look at the systems and not blame the people right away. Right. So it would be so easy for you to be new at the company and somebody saying, you got to get rid of this person, and just take their word for it. And maybe on the initially it looks that way, but so often you're right. It's about the past leadership or the lack of systems and structure. So I love that you looked at the systems and the process and not just the people initially.
Of course.
Um, yeah. So tell me a little bit about this lead with dissonance. What does that mean?
So, and obviously, I connected to the topic of strategy versus operations and execution. It's important that those people that we were talking about in your team, understand what is it that you're doing that is strategic, because you don't want them to feel like there's a black box called strategic work that nobody knows what it means, what it is, and what are you actually dedicating your time to. That's number one. Number two, if you show that, then they know, okay, this is what I would have to do if I ever get into this job. So whether they like it or not, you can show them, look, this is the way I do it, and if you want to be in my job eventually and you want to have a career development, I can help you in this way, because strategic thinking means this and that. So you need to start planning ahead. You need to go to certain things. How do you manage communication? How much time do you invest into politics, discussing priorities with your executives, influencing decisions. So, if to me, leading without dissonance mean be very transparent,
Mm,
and not everybody will like it. And that's one thing to me that is also true about being transparent and honest, is to say, look, this is the way I do it. It doesn't mean it's the perfect formula of success, and this is why I'm asking you to do this way, or to organize your job in that other way, because that's the way it fits into the model, the operating model we're running. So if you show this operating model, this is what HR business partners do, this is what specialists do, this is what operations do, this is payroll, and this is me. This is what happens every day in my job. Like, what would be a one day in the life of Federico when he sits on his desk or in a house working? And if you don't have nothing to show, maybe your end balance the other way around. Like, everything is strategic, but then actually, what is it that you're doing, right?
right.
So I think it's about being honest and transparent.
I love that. I think it reminds me of like parents that are like, just do it because I say so. Right? Just do it. Don't worry about it. Just
Right.
do it in your little vacuum. And having leaders like you, I think it would be so cool to have to work for somebody who's like, let me explain why I'm doing this, so that you can see the bigger picture. And I trust that you are smart enough to then make your own judgment calls and decisions based on the bigger picture that you can see. So I'm sure that made it easier for you to lead as well once they understood those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it takes patience, of course. Just like you mentioned, the kids, it's exactly the same thing. Explaining the whys to smart people is hard because they are smart and they ask why. And if you provide bad answers, they will ask, but why? And why this? And why that? So you become smarter and you can also challenge yourself like, okay, that was actually a good question. I don't have an answer. Why is it that I'm doing this way or that way? So being honest and open about what you do and your agenda, it's a challenge, but it's also very rewarding, especially if you like to develop professionals.
I think that's so challenging though sometimes, like to have the bandwidth. We talked about this in one of our mastermind meetings today, is just as the CHRO having the bandwidth to develop and train and have those conversations with your team. How many of you in the audience would love to have more time with your team to have these conversations? Just put a yes in the comments. Federico, how do you make sure that you carve out that time for your team?
um, I think, for example, there are some habits that I picked up probably because I work for a lot of Swiss and German people. So they helped me a lot about picking some organization and planning habits. For example, scheduling a touch base with people individually, scheduling monthly or bi-weekly meetings with the team, um, so we can discuss other things or maybe even share time if you're working remotely. Um, how do you take notes of what's going on with an individual so you don't have to just do a recount at the end of the year and performance management becomes a one conversation where you have to recap 12 months of work. So I have emails, drafts, one per individual, every year where I start taking notes every time I have an exchange, like, whoa, this was awesome. You did this and that. And so I go back and take the time, like this day, using the STAR model, situation, task, action, result, said, she did this. I usually don't put the conclusion. I just put when happened.
Yeah,
You can even do it faster now that you can dictate or using AI.
right.
But back in my days, it was typing, but I took the time. And yes, it's time consuming, but at the end of the year, you have everything there and you can recall conversations. You can even have interventions in 3 months, 2 months, reward people, congratulate people, say, hey, do you want to work on this? Maybe it's something you're interested in.
Sure.
And let's just set up a time to discuss it, right?
Right. It feels like you're spending the time that you don't have, but in reality, on the back end, it pays off in, dramatically because, you're teaching them something that will help you help you do your job better, and they can do their job better, which makes life so much easier for you. So I think it's an investment that's worthwhile, and so it just feels so good on the back end when you've got somebody who you've developed from really hardly any skills. So it looks like in the audience, Terry does it. He does weekly calls and ad hoc one-on-ones, biweekly. Um, yeah, it's hard to do, but you gotta find the time. And sometimes it looks like he does it in the evenings. The other thing you were saying about how you wrote it down manually. I'm even older than you, so then I used to print out things that I try to remember and put it in their drop file. I don't know if anybody even knows what a drop file. If you know what a drop file is, put that in the chat, and then I'll know you're as old as I am. Um, but today, like imagine like just on ChatGPT, you could just start a chat, and every time you finish with somebody, you can just dictate into that chat and keep a running chat for that employee for all year round. Right.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, the tools that we have today,
Right.
they let no space for excuses about, oh, it's time consuming. I need to brief things.
Right. Or even like if you have, let's say you have team meetings each week with your HR leadership team. There's moments that you're teaching the entire group. That could be recorded now, right? That can be put on an LMS so easily. You can put it in YouTube for if you want to
Absolutely.
keep it,
Absolutely.
and then you can share that with the future HR leaders. There's so many ways to do this. There's almost no excuse now. All right. The one we've been waiting for, the 30-70 rule. So we debated 20, 80, 20, 30, 70. Tell us about this and how this rule has benefited you as a CHRO.
Of course, and it's not something that I've invented. Of course, it's been around in business and many other things for over centuries. But basically, is okay, if I have to split, right? I would like to have my 50-50 strategic versus operations. What is it that I have to let go? What is the 70% of operational tasks I should delegate, automate, or outsource, so I can focus on the 30% that are still operational, but are so close to my strategic goals or are so critical for my stakeholders that I need to keep in my hands, which doesn't mean you have to do everything, but it means they will occupy a constant space in your agenda and your calendar, right? And depending on the size of the company, the size of your team, this can vary a lot. If you have a very large team, you may not have enough transactional things. So what is it, the actual 70%? Maybe a few. But if you, for example, you're in a startup, you're in a small company, you're actually starting up HR, you probably have the 100%. So start prioritizing which ones are not really adding value to your strategic goals. They may take too much of your time, and you may sometimes you think, I think I'm overpaid to be doing this task because it's a task that I can easily teach someone to do. This should be in the 70% bucket, transactional things. Eventually, if you develop a team and you have good professionals, you can also start doing the same thing with your strategic work. So over 100% of all the strategic tasks that I have, which ones are the ones I cannot delegate and which ones I can start delegating to develop my team? So I remember a case in my last work. There was an organizational design request, which was super strategic, but it has a lot of steps, and some of the steps were more transactional but still strategic because you really needed to know a lot of things. That was a perfect example of say, okay, this is the whole thing is strategic. I can hold it myself, do the presentations, take all the credit, or I can share it with some of the people in my team and they don't know what to do. So I'm going to have to invest a lot of time into explaining this is how I would do it. This is how I would approach it. So my tasks shifts into mentoring and coaching. That's that task instead of doing it myself, which would have been faster.
Yeah.
So this is what this 30-70 rule means. Like prioritize based on what you want to delegate, what you want to keep, both in the operational side as well as the strategic side.
Yeah. I know it's hard. Sometimes you think, oh, it's faster if I just do it myself.
Yeah,
But
always. If you're a good expert, you always feel that way.
right. I tell you, the junior folks or the hypos and the people who haven't had that exposure, that's what they live for. I was talking to one of our mastermind members, and they had, one of their HR managers get involved with just planning of one of their HR meetings, and she was thrilled, right? So happy to be involved in something like that. And I don't know what that was.
Oh, it was my phone.
Okay.
Sorry. I moved it in the table and it's quick.
My dog was almost going to go crazy. He sounded like a mouse. Okay. In any case, so that's awesome. Now I know we're going a little bit over, but if I can just keep you for a couple more minutes, you gave some examples of small waves and surf waves and tide waves, and we weren't even, when we prepped for this, there was no hurricane even going on. But
Yeah.
tell me what that means.
Yeah, of course. I remember it's based on a very specific situation that I have. I had the leader of the business was very spontaneous. He was an ideas person, right? So that person has 5 ideas per second.
I've never
And
met a CEO like that.
of course not, right? Of course not. And he needed to download those ideas with the right experts, right? So if it had a person in it, I was the person he would download it to. So he will come into my office, and we had a fantastic relationship. We worked together really well. But I had to learn how to work with him. I remember one of my colleagues in finance, he was super stressed out one day and said, I cannot work like this. He comes to my office. He fires things left and right. I try to catch those things. The next day I come up with a plan and he says like, no, we're not going to do that. And I don't know what to do. And I said, look, using a surfing analogy, you go into the ocean, you need to learn how to distinguish a small wave that you just want to let it pass, a good wave that you want to surf, or a tidal change. That this is the thing, it's going to take you whether you like it or not, right? So when you listen to those things, those ideas, those requests, you need to understand, okay, is this something I can actually delegate? Because it's a one-time thing, it's not strategic, it's not important. I think he's just upset, or maybe it's the idea of the day. Let it simmer, don't react to it. If it is a good idea that connects with what you believe it's value for the organization, that is the surfing wave, get on it. And the tidal wave is the best example is technology shifts, things that you pick up in the organization that are telling you, we need to change, right? There's a change coming. If I don't sit on this as a strategic leader and drive it with my CEO and with my executives, I'm going to be left behind. So that's the tide. You need to get on it whether you like it or not. And it's definitely, needless to say, super strategic.
That's awesome. I feel like we could spend an hour just talking about that, but we have all experienced CEOs. That's why CEOs are so good at what they do, because they come up with lots of ideas and we have to filter through what makes sense. All right. Well, Federico, thank you so much for spending time with us here. Hey, guys, and thank you all for joining us live. We will have this posted on our website in case anybody missed it. But really appreciate your time, and stay safe in Miami. Hopefully there won't be any major tides that come your way.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.